Hey, this is Colin at ShiftSynth1. Now that we've covered the oscillators and the low frequency oscillators, I'm going to start moving a lot more quickly through the rest of the synth engine. Because the rest of the engine is a lot more straightforward, and there just aren't as many intense drop-down options that we need to get into. So I'm actually going to cover three sections in this lesson. I'm going to cover the filter, the mixer, and the voice controls section. All of these are very straightforward. All of them carry common elements in synthesis. And I'm going to go through the concepts today. I'm not going to just breeze over them, but quite frankly, they just won't take as much time to cover as the low frequency oscillator and the oscillator sections because they're a lot more straightforward. So we're going to start today with the filter. The filter actually has a pre-drive aspect to it. And if you take a look at the drive section here, this dictates the level of distortion applied to the sound before the filter cutoff. So if we take a look at the drive types, there are several options here. If you want to take a look in the manual at the descriptions, you can read how Novation describes what they are. Really, the way I use this is I go through and I listen to them and I pick whichever one sounds best for the patches that I'm currently developing. So you'll notice that the drive types here are exactly the same as the drive types in the distortion section, which we'll get to later. The difference is that the distortion is applied after the filter cutoff, and the drive type in the filter is applied before. So when you apply a filter, it is cutting off frequencies that are being driven before it. The filter type contains 6 types of filters that can be applied to the sound coming from your oscillators. They have 2 low pass, 2 band pass filters, and 2 high pass filters. Low pass filters simply mean that low frequencies are allowed through the filter and high frequencies are stopped as you increase the filter cutoff. Band pass means that as you increase the filter cutoff, both high frequencies and low frequencies are cut out of the sound. And high pass means that as you increase the frequency cutoff, low frequencies are cut out of the sound. You can play around with those. The distinctions are obvious, and so I'm not going to demonstrate the sounds here. Routing enables you to skip the frequency cutoff by one or both of the oscillators. I'll warn you about this. If you bypass the filter, the volume of the oscillator will be much higher because the tones are not being filtered in any way. So keep that in mind if you decide to do that. You'll have to play around with the mixer a lot to get the balance right. It also stops quite a bit of control over the tonality, but hey, some people like that, so give it a shot. Oscillator 1 bypass just means that oscillator 1 does not go through the filter. It goes straight to the mixer. And oscillator 1 plus oscillator 2 bypass means that both oscillators do not go through the frequency filter before going into the mixer. Frequency is just the level of the filter cutoff that is applied to your sound. This is just your simple cutoff filter that's pretty much available in every subtractive synthesizer. Track is key track. This is a common concept with synthesizers, but basically the higher it is, the more the filter opens as you go up the keyboard. So if I turn up the frequency and I have a max track here and I play a really low note, you kind of hear it's buzzing. But if I turn down track with a very low note, you'll hear the filter decrease. So it'll become more bright. So yeah, if I start high and I press a button here, the filter is a lot more open. And if I reduce the tracking, it will dull the sound. So it provides a little bit of balance with your keyboard. As you go lower, the filter cutoff grows, and as you go higher, the filter cutoff shrinks. So it's a lot of times it's good to have filter tracking on because it a bit of balance to your keyboard. Resonance accentuates the overtones of your oscillators. So if I have the frequency at a moderate position and I decide to turn up the resonance, you can hear the higher overtones. It starts to get real ringy at the top and really high-pitched squealy. Q norm alters the bandwidth of the peak created by the resonance control. It kind of eases the resonance. So if I turn up resonance here, it's taking out some of that squealiness. But Q normalization will not work unless resonance is operating. So keep that in mind. Envelope to frequency has to do with the filter envelope here, which we'll go over in the next lesson. They wanted to provide functionality for you to be able to control the depth in which the filter envelope applies to the filter. Because if you just have it max all the time, then you'd get huge swings in your filter cutoff, which you don't want. So they provided this mechanism for you to shrink or increase the amount the filter envelope is applied to the frequency cutoff. If it's negative, it flips the filter envelope upside down. So to give you guys an example of this, I'm going to set the envelope to frequency at max. And I'm going to turn up the attack on the filter envelope really high. The frequency here is set at 70. And if I play a note, it will slowly come in to the full filter cutoff that I have set at. And if I turn this down, it's not as accentuated. The mixer section has everything to do with combining the sounds of the oscillators. Oscillator 1 and oscillator 2 here are simply the volumes of the two oscillators. And I actually have a square wave here as oscillator 2, so I'm going to give you a tone that's just the saw wave right now, and as I turn up oscillator 2, you'll hear that square wave come into focus. Really simple. So the ring modulation multiplies the oscillator 1 and oscillator 2 waveforms together to produce a new type of tone. Typically it's very metallic. I really like to modulate using the ring mod. It's a really fun way to change some of the tonality of your sounds without going overboard. Noise level is simply the amount of noise that's applied. It's a very simple noise function. Now, I'll warn you about noise. I think the noise can come on a little strong, so I don't end up using noise as often as I would probably like to, because it's not very subtle with this synth engine. Pre-FX is an amplifier to the sound before it enters the FX section, which is the distortion in the chorus sections. And post-FX is an amplifier to the sound after it's gone through the distortion in the chorus effect. The voice controls are an interesting and often overlooked area of the synthesizer. The polyphony mode provides three options. Poly, which enables you to play chords and more than one note at the same time. Mono, which enables you to only play one note at a time, but you can get better effects using portamento and pre-glide, which I'll go into in a second. Mono autoglide is a mono function, but the portamento and pre-glide are only applied when you're using legato. And I'll go into that in a second, but just keep that in mind for now. So I think poly is pretty self-explanatory. I think most people like to use poly more than mono because poly gives you more options and is more interesting. But mono is what most of these controls are related to. So we're going to stick to mono for now. The keyboard octave is actually super straightforward. It's MIDI linked to your Novation circuit. So if you mess around with the octaves here, it'll change on your circuit editor. So if I press octave down, it'll go down to -2, 3. So it's very straightforward. It just tells you where the octave is on your keypad. So portamento is often referred to as glide. If one note is pressed, nothing happens. But pressing that note establishes a base from which the next note is glided to. So if I turn this way up and I play a C here, so nothing is happening, and then I play the note above it, the C above that C, it will glide up an octave. So the lower that portamento is set, the faster that glide will happen. So note, no portamento is happening here because I'm pressing the same note. But as soon as I press the note one octave below, it'll swing down there. And something to keep in mind here with a lot of these functions is that the dials are not linear. They seem to be exponential. So I have it set at 43, and the glide is almost negligible. Now that's very common with synthesizers. The functionality of the dials is not a linear one. And you'll notice that a lot in the filter and the voice controls section. You'll also notice it in the oscillator section and the LFO section quite a bit. So just, keep that in mind. There's generally sweet spots to most synthesizers. It's just the way sound design operates. So I'm going to actually turn this up again to like 70 because I bet we'll get a better effect here. There you go, you can hear it. So that's what portamento does. If you have portamento operating and then you turn on pre-glide, portamento will no longer be operating in the same functionality. With pre-glide, every time you press a note, it will be swung to from a fixed destination. So if I turn this all the way up, and I turn the pre-glide way up, you see it didn't matter that I hadn't pressed a note prior to it. Every time I press a note, no matter what note, it's going to be approached in the same way. So portamento means that the note is approached relative, and pre-glide means that the approach is fixed. So let's see what happens if I turn down the pre-glide. So the rate stays the same because the portamento has not changed, and but the amount of the pre-glide is decreased. Right, so let's see what happens if I turn down that portamento rate to like 70, and I take up the pre-glide again to like 12. Yeah. So it's approaching very quickly. Well, that just about covers it, guys, for this section. I know I'm going a lot faster through these concepts. They're just not as complicated as the prior lessons. So yeah, if you have any questions or need clarification, feel free to reach out, guys. I'm always around. And I'll see you guys in the next lesson. Thanks. Bye.